How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to another How to Play video at Battlegrounds Game Center. Today I'm going to be taking you through Necromolds along with the new Call to Arms expansion set. The base game of Necromolds is a really great way to introduce younger children into wargaming, but the new Call to Arms expansion adds a lot more depth and complexity that can be really fun for kids and adults alike. So I wanted to go through and show you kind of the base mechanics, what the expansion adds, go through all the different actions and everything like that, and show you basically a quick run through on how to play this game and to show you if it's something that you'd be interested in picking up. If you're looking to get your family or some friends into wargaming, this is a great place to start. So we're going to go through setup of the game using the core rules as well as the expansion. And then I'll kind of show you some of the actions, how you run through. I won't go into probably every single detail there is because this game is very scalable, so you can make it as easy or as hard as you want. You could add house rules, stuff like that. There's like these objective tokens that you can add. But we're just going to show you the base game with like how combat works, how you create your force, and all that. And let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the very first thing you're going to do is place out the battle map here. It's this nice square map that has these green lines, and it's a really cool piece of artwork. You're going to find these gems here, place them in a pile. These gems are used to add combat dice to your pool. You are then going to get all the different components to give to the players. So the base game comes with these command dice. Each player is going to get 4 in the basic version. There's advanced rules, but I'll leave you guys to kind of explore that when you get the game. But everybody's going to get these. They're going to get 6 combat dice, which are these acrylic ones right here. You're going to get a caster ring, which is going to be used to smash your opponent's minis. You're going to have a distance tool. So the distance tool has a denotation of close, medium, and far. This is how you do movement and ranged attacks. And then you're going to have a container of spell clay. So whether you have spell clay that comes with the game from like the monster packs or the core set itself, or if you don't have any of this, you could always just use like regular Play-Doh or some kind of equivalent. So that's everything you get whenever you're playing the base game. Now the expansion adds a few more things, so we're going to go over those real quick. You're going to get a champion die here. So this is going to be used anytime you roll dice in combat. It has some cool unique effects. You're going to get a banner. This banner will denote one of your monsters as your champion. So this is where effects are going to come from. You're going to get these 3 reroll cubes, which we'll go into more detail later, which are these yellow cubes. You're going to get 3 of these red combat or wound combat dice. So they replace the normal combat dice whenever you have wounds. You're going to get a last stand disc, which we'll go into more detail later, but it's this little red circle. And then you're going to get 1 power tracker, which again, we'll go into more detail here soon. In addition to those things, you're also going to place out all of the different wounds. So these are like swords and axes. So just set them to the side. They're going to be used for whenever your models take wounds. It's really fun. You get to stick them in. It's really cool. The next thing you're going to need is each player is going to randomly be assigned a Necrocaster board. So this is where you're going to be placing your power, your cubes, or last stand disc. The Necrocaster is going to kind of work as like an extra powerful monster, or it gives you extra abilities on the field. So whoever you denote to be your champion, they will be doing these abilities off of that champion. They all have 3 different abilities as well as the last laugh ability, but we'll go over all of this as we get into the actual gameplay. But for the time being, we're just going to go ahead and place it on the board here. We're going to get our power, set it to 3. It has a little bit of a different colorization, so you know. You're going to get your cubes. They're going to go onto the rerolls here. And then your last laugh disc is going to go where it says last laugh. So then your board is all set up, ready to go. And your opponent will do the same. They'll get a random board, set it up, put all of your components that you need for the game, buy it, and we're about ready to begin. The next step is we're going to take this stack of cards here. These are your soul cards. We're going to give them a good shuffle. We're going to lay out 3 face up. And then we're going to take our artifact cards, which are these cards here, give them a good shuffle, and then place out 1 underneath each soul card. So it'll look something like this. And then each player is going to roll 3 of these combat dice, and then for every hit, which is a little starburst here, whoever has the most is going to pick one of these sets. So they might pick this soul card along with this artifact card. So whatever soul card you pick or artifact card you pick, the top or bottom one comes with it. So it comes in sets. And then the next player will pick. And then whatever is extra will just go back to their decks. You're going to set your soul card up next to your Necrocaster, and then you're going to look at your artifact card, and then you're going to look for the specific artifact that corresponds to it. So right now we have the Grave-Kept Dagger. So if we go into our little blue pile of things here, we're going to look, and there is the dagger. And then that is just going to go with the card for now, but it is going to eventually get assigned to one of your monsters. It's a very cool way to outfit your force. So you have you're a little bit more unique than your opponent. Okay, after we have all that set up, we're going to move on to placing our terrain pieces. Now, the base game comes with some terrain pieces, but the Call to Arms comes with some even cooler terrain pieces, so we're going to use those today. Before we place terrain pieces, though, each player is going to take 6 of their combat dice, give them a good roll, and then the player with the most hits will get to place the first piece of terrain out first. If there's a tie, just re-roll them until somebody wins. So say I won that roll, I'll take a piece of terrain, and then I'm going to place it anywhere on the board I'd like. So say I place it here. Then my opponent will go, they'll pick a piece of terrain, they'll place it wherever they like, as such, and then I get to pick the last piece. Now if you're in a multiplayer game, it would just go around, but right now we're just going to show you how to do 2 players. And then I'm going to place mine, say, right there, and we'll just have a nice little spread of terrain for you. Now, after placing terrain pieces, you would typically create your armies and you get ready to play. But the Call to Arms expansion actually adds an optional rule to where you get to place out these objective tokens. We're not going to do that today, just to keep things a little bit more simpler as we do a run through. But that is in the rule book as you're setting up, and it'll teach you how to do that. The next step is really fun, and that is building your forces out of your spell clay. So we're going to take that, whatever color you have chosen. All of the clay in here, or Play-Doh, or any equivalent that you have, is going to be what makes your molds. So you're going to choose a number of molds. Doesn't matter how many. You can have one of each type of mold. You can have multiples of the same. There's no real restrictions other than the fact that they have a volume amount, so that just determines how much they're going to take out of the spell clay. If you don't have enough to fully fill the mold, then you can't make it. But you're going to take your mold out here. You're going to roll it into a ball. You're going to choose one of the models that you want to make. So like say, I might want to make Tormarak here. You're going to place it in, smash it, get a good smash, reveal, and then you can just start taking the excess away to create your model. So that is one model already done. Now, again, you can make any number of those as long as you have the spell clay to do it. But when you're building your forces, you might actually want to take a look at some of these. They have keywords associated with them at the very top here. So like there's Guardian here, Guardian, some of them say Forsaken, Thrasher, and so on. In the game though, when you have 2 that are next to each other with the same keyword, within close distance, they buff each other on a certain stat. So they both buff on defenses because they're Guardian. And what that does is it allows you to re-roll a die if they're by you whenever they attack. So keep that in mind when you're building your forces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and build my little force here, build the enemy force, get them all set up, ready to go, and then we'll go right into a game. Okay, so I've got my models built. Built a tiny little force here for the demo today. So I've got an Insectomite, some Blood Moms and such, and then my opponent has a few models over there for demo purposes. So these are what they look like. They're pretty cool models. All these molds are really cool, and if you really want to, you can always let them dry out. You can paint them just to have some models, but the fun really comes in when you get to smash them. So let's go into positioning our armies. Now, depending on the number of spell books you've used, these are the molds that have the different monsters listed on them with their stats. This will determine the amount of gems you get at the beginning of the game. So I have 3. That's going to give me 3 gems to start. My opponent has 2. That's going to give them 2 gems to start. This is listed in the rulebook, so if you have any questions, always refer back to the core rulebook for any of that. Next, we're going to position our armies on the battle map. Now, the player that finished molding their whole army first with their spell clay will get to pick the side that they want to start at. So let's say it was the orange player. Since they only made 2 models, I made 4, they would have probably gotten done before me, so they get to pick their side. They're just going to go ahead and pick that side over there, so that means I'm going to get this opposite side to them. If it's multiplayer, then there's some additional rules, but I'll leave that for you to discover. When deploying, the monsters must touch the green line here on the battle map. So my opponent will deploy all their forces first, and then I will deploy all mine, and they must touch the green line. So there I have a fully deployed force, and as does my opponent. After deploying your forces, if you have the Call to Arms expansion, now we're going to choose a champion and deploy our artifact. So a champion is recommended to have relatively even stats with movement, combat, because they're going to be moving around the board, getting into combat, doing a lot of abilities. So you want them to be a little bit more survivable. So I think I am going to go ahead and pick my Tormarak to be my champion. So they have a combat value of 4, range of 2, 2 defense, and they have a 1 to 2 movement with a good ranged attack. So I think this is a pretty good all-arounder. When you choose your champion, you're going to take your champion banner here. You're going to pick him up. So this is Tormarak here. And then you're going to place your banner in him to denote, hey, that's my guy. Just like so. And then place him back onto the board. Next, the artifact that you chose will also get to be deployed. So I have a dagger here. Whoever I pick will get the dagger. It could be your champion, but it could also be any of the other monsters you have. So let's say I will make this blood mump the one that holds my dagger. So I'm going to take the dagger like such, stick it in. Now he looks even cooler with 2 axes and a dagger coming out of his stomach. And then I will put him back on the board here. Now, your artifact has stats as well as your soul card, but as we get into combat, I will go more into detail on how those items work. After both players have picked their champion and their artifact, we are ready to move on to the game. When you start a round, the player with the least amount of models will always get to go first. However, if there's a tie, you will each roll 6 combat dice, and then whoever has the most hits on those dice will get to go first instead. So in this case, it's going to be our opponent, the orange player. After determining first player, each player is going to take their 4 command dice, they're going to give them a roll, and they're going to start assigning their dice to their monsters. Now these dice have a few different symbols. They have the movement symbol here, which are the little green feet. They have the ranged attack symbol, which is this little lightning bolt. They have a magic symbol, so if any monsters have a magic ability, that gets to go off. And then they have a wild symbol, which can be turned to any side. So each player is going to go ahead and give these a roll. So this is going to be for me. This is going to be for the opponent. So this is a lovely roll. My opponent rolled all ranged attacks. I rolled ranged and wild. Now you have the option to re-roll some of these dice. If you choose to remove one of them, you get to re-roll any die that you wish. So say I re-roll that, well, I just got another ranged. Or instead, you can choose to remove 2 dice to turn any die to any side you wish. So like say maybe he gets rid of his 2 ranged dice he had, and he turns one of those ranged into a movement. So those would be his dice. Then if I'm doing it as well, I might get rid of this ranged die here to re-roll this other ranged die, and I get a second wild. So I have 2 wild and a ranged, and then he has a ranged and a movement. Next, we're each going to assign our dice to our monsters. Now, your monsters are going to have different boxes listed on them that are going to have different symbols. So this is movement, this is ranged or movement. Now, some of the boxes have multiple symbols. When you place a die here, you must choose one. That is the one that you're going to be used. You can't use both. And then some are actually going to have the magic symbol here as well, which if you put a magic die on this means this ability is now triggered for the rest of the round. So if I do a magic die here, if it is larger or equal to an enemy monster, it gets more attacks. But if I don't put a magic die here, it doesn't get this ability. So when we're assigning dice, I might go ahead and assign some movement here to, I'm going to use a wild. To my blood mumps here, it's going to turn to a movement. And then I'm going to use my second wild here into a movement for my Tormarak. My opponent had a movement and a ranged, so they might choose to move their blood mump and give it the ranged ability as well. Next, the player who has the least amount will get to go first. They'll activate all of their monsters. When you activate, you're going to take your spell book, you're going to pick one of the dice, you're going to remove it, and resolve the action. So that is movement, that resolves movement. If I remove this, that would resolve a ranged attack, but we'll get to that here very shortly. But for now, we'll go ahead and remove the movement die, which shows that it has a movement of 2. This corresponds to your movement tool, or range tool, which has a close value, it has a medium value, which is 2 pips, and then a far value, which is 3 pips. So depending on how many pips you see, that's the side that you use. So he's going to move 2. When he moves 2, he's going to take the movement tool, he's going to go to the medium side, which is over here. He's going to angle it onto his monster as far up to the base as he can, and then he can move the monster in any direction. You can move it partially and then make a turn, however you wish to do it. So say he just moves there. However, you cannot move past the front, so it's from front base to front base. Next, he has a ranged attack he could try to attempt, but there isn't going to be anybody within distance of 3, so that ranged attack doesn't happen. Those are all his dice, so all his monsters have activated, so now it would go to me. I have 1 foot on my mud bumps here, which have a movement value of 2. Now, I made 2 of these mud bumps, so whenever I remove a die to activate it, I actually get to activate both of them in any order I wish, but I have to complete the action before I move on to the other one. So, I remove a movement value of 2. I'm going to take my 2 here, and I'm going to go front base, and I'm just going to move it to front base for one of them, and in my other one, front base to front base. They have both moved. I had no other dice on there, so I would move to see if I had any more dice on any of my other monsters, which I do. I have a movement and a ranged attack on my Tormarak here. So he's going to use his movement, which is 2 as well. I'm going to go front base, and then I'm going to move him up to here. And then he has a ranged attack of 3, however, I am not within range to do that ranged attack. Now, since that is my champion, he has a few additional things he can do. Now, on our Necrocaster board, you will see a few different additional actions. You've got during turn actions, before rolls, after rolls, and so on. Now, since it is still my turn, I have an ability here that says during turn. It allows me to spend some power to use this ability, which states move target monster at close distance, not into combat, once per turn. So when you're doing these abilities on your board, you're going to have power here. So we each start at 3. Now, depending on how far the monster is that I'm choosing, and it corresponds to what my commander here, he is the one that's giving this ability out. So if it's out of range, I can't do the ability, but I have my blood mumps here. I can choose somebody within range up to 3 to do this ability. The range will dictate how much power you spend. So if I take my movement tool here and I say I want to move this guy that's right next to me, he's within close, so it's going to cost me 1 power. If I wanted to say do this monster back here, the Insectomite, who didn't get the move this turn, he is within a medium distance, which is 2. It would cost me 2 power, which would take me down to 1. And actually, that is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and spend 2 power. I'm going to tell him to march. So he gets to do a movement of 2, which he's going to go this way. And that's kind of how triggering your Necrocaster will work. There are also some abilities that happen before you roll combat dice, after you roll combat dice, and so on, but we will get into that once we actually get into combat here. Once each player has used all of their command dice, that's going to go ahead and end the round. Now, there are 2 ways for the game to end. One comes from the core box, another comes from the Call to Arms expansion set. In the original core box, if you have no more monsters on the field, they're all smashed, but I have 1 or more left, I'll win the game. If we end up smashing each other, our last monster, then it's a tie. The Call to Arms expansion, however, though, will add if I smash your champion 2 times in a game, I immediately win. So there are some new ways for the game to end, and there's also ways for you to expand on that, make your own rules. The game has a lot of variety, and it's really fun. But this is just the end of the first round. So we got a few more rounds to go until we get to the end here. So if we go back to the top of the round, we check to see who has the least amount of models. It is still the orange player, so they'll still get to go first. However, had I lost a model when we were tied, then when we would roll our combat dice to see. But alas, they still get to go first. So each player then is going to take their command dice and give them a roll. So we'll go ahead and roll for the orange player, who's going to have 2 magic symbols, 2 range symbols. We're going to go ahead and roll for me. I'm going to have a movement, a magic, and 2 ranged. Now, I don't really need the magic, so I'm going to go ahead and spend one of my ranged to re-roll that magic. And I got a wild. Perfect. The other player here, they're going to spend one of their magic to re-roll a ranged. And they go back to range. So they're not going to be moving this turn. Then we will both assign our dice however we see fit. So say I'm going to do my blood mumps here. I'm going to move them twice because I have a wild and I have a movement. And I might do a ranged attack on him. And that's it. The other player here is going to go ahead and use just ranged attack on both and the magic on their knacklings if it does apply, and then we will see. So then we go to activations. First is going to be the orange player. They have no movements. Their magic goes into effect for the entirety of the round, but they're not within range, so they're just going to go ahead and remove their dice, and that's it. They're done. They didn't get any movements, so they're not going to be moving. It goes back to me. I'm going to use one of my movement values here off my mud bumps to move 2. So I'm going to move this one 2 here. And then I'm going to use my wild here to move my mud bump another 2. Moving into base contact with their champion. When this happens, we automatically go into a melee combat step. So let's go ahead and run through how combat works in melee. So now we are in melee combat. I have moved my mud bump into our opponent's champion, the blood mump. Now, since I activated the mud bump and it has 2 guys that I can activate, we must resolve this combat before I can carry on doing any more activations with the other blood bump. So in theory, there's no real way to kind of double up on an opponent. Once you move in, you attack that opponent and you either win or you lose. So to follow the steps of combat though, we are going to look at our stats here, and in melee combat it'll say 3. That means I have an attack dice pool of 3 dice. Our opponent will then take their stats and they will notice their defense is 3. So they will have a defense pool of 3 dice. Now starting with the attacking player, we get to modify our dice pools. To modify, this is where the gems are going to come into play. So right now I have 3 attack dice and I have 4 gems. If I wish to add another attack die, I'd have to spend an equal amount of gems equal to the die I want to add. So in this case, I have 3 dice. I want to add a 4th. It's going to cost me 4 gems. So let's say I do that, and I get rid of my 4 gems. I now have 4 attack dice. The defending player has 3 defense dice, but only 2 gems, so he would need 4 in order to add that 4th die, so the 2 gems isn't going to work for him, so he only has 3. Now in addition, if we are, before rolling these dice, if our champion is still on the map, which both of ours are, we each get to add our champion die. Now the champion die has a few other unique symbols that we'll go into here in a minute, but they will also roll in this attack pool. This goes for the defender as well. So defender will take their champion die. So right now, this is what we're at. I have 4 attack dice with my champion die. My opponent has 3 defense dice with his champion die. Now before we roll our attack dice, we need to double check to see if there's any before you roll abilities listed anywhere on our force. So that could be on your Necrocaster board, or as in my case, my mud bump over there is carrying the dagger, which is an artifact that has a before you roll ability. These abilities can be used in certain situations, so if it's melee, range, or defense, and it'll have a highlight to show you when you can use it. So currently, I can use this during melee, or I can use it during defense. Now, it'll tell me what it does. So right here it says roll a champion die, and then I can instantly deal any wound results to the enemy. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So before you roll, I'm going to take my champion die and I'm going to roll it and see if I get any wound symbols. I do. Now, on your champion die, there's a few different symbols. But the main one you're going to see is wounds. So that's this little sword here. There are also hits, but those are ignored for now. We're only using the wounds. Wounds are a way to mitigate your opponent's attack dice. So I get to take one of these wound markers and I get to stick it in whoever I'm attacking. So I'm going to take the champion here, and he's now got a wound in him, a sword. Now what this does is their attack pool or defense pool is now going to be augmented. So originally he had 3 regular attack dice, but now he has a wound. So now it's got to swap out with a wound die, which turns to a d6 here. So he's a little bit worse when it comes to defending or attacking. Now, if you ever would take a 4th wound, then that model is immediately destroyed or smashed. So you got to keep an eye out for how many wounds you have. So I completed one of my before you rolls, and I could keep doing before you roll triggers as long as they're different. So say if my Necrocaster was within range, he could also use some power and abilities to give off to that model, but he is out of range. However, I am attacking the opponent's champion, so they might have a before you roll that we need to check out too. Now I'm facing off against Igneous. He does have a before you roll ability, which can be used during an attack or defense, which we are doing defense currently. It would cost him 1 power since it's on himself, and then after modifying a roll, add a hit or a defense to a target friendly monster resolve for each wound in the target or the enemy roll. So this would be for their champion die. Or I can add 1 wound to the result of my attack. So what he's going to do is he is going to go ahead and do the first part, which he will spend 1 power, and then he gets to add a defense to the target monster, which is himself, for each wound in his target champion roll or the enemy's roll. And you can keep doing before you roll abilities if they're different. And then once that both players have finished doing that, then we get to roll our dice. So now we are ready to go ahead and roll our dice. I will go ahead and roll mine first. And then he will go ahead and roll his. Alright, so our dice pools are as followed. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hits on my regular dice, plus I ended up rolling the soul symbol on my champion die. This corresponds to your soul card, which it'll tell you what the symbol does. So in this case, I will have 1 additional hit. So now I have 1 from the soul, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hits in total. My opponent ended up rolling 1, 2 shields and 1 wound on his champion. So currently, I am winning the combat with 6-2. Now, there are some abilities that we can start doing. We can redo some rerolls, we could do our after roll abilities, so let's go ahead and start there. The player with the fewest hit modifiers gets to modify first, so currently that would be the defender. So he can modify either by spending 1 of his reroll cubes to reroll a die if he wishes. Now this only happens if the champion itself is in combat, so currently his champion is combat, so he would be able to use his rerolls. Or if he has any after roll abilities, like Rock Slide here, he could do that. So Rock Slide is only for ranged attacks, not defending, so that is not something he will be able to utilize right now. But looking at the combat results, even with the number of rerolls, he probably won't really be able to stop it. And once he uses these rerolls, they're gone. So he might just go ahead and say, it's fine, you win the combat. When you win a combat against a monster, whether it's your champion, your enemy, however which, whoever won the combat, the opponent will get smashed. There's only 1 wound, technically, on every monster. So as long as you win, you get smashed. If there's ever a tie, you would both get smashed. But since we're smashing the champion, there's a few things we got to do. First, you got to remove all the pieces here, just so you don't want to accidentally smash them. Then you're going to take your little caster ring here. You're going to smash the guy like this, like so. He now becomes an obstacle on the board for you that you can't move through, that you'll have to start moving around. Next, if you smash a champion, their last laugh ability, which is going to have the little red circle on it, will trigger. When this happens, you'll read what it says, and you'll usually have 2 options. So it'll have a top ability here, like reposition 3 terrain pieces without completely preventing movement across the map, and then he'll gain a power. Or he can just gain power. So he didn't like that, so you know what? He's going to take these 3 terrain pieces and completely rearrange them however he wishes. The only thing is he just can't stop another player from being able to move across the battle map. So what we'll do is we'll remove some dice here. And then he's going to go ahead and put this right here. Maybe something like this here. And maybe that right there. So he's kind of blocked off my force here and maybe protected his little guy over here. But there's still a way to get around, so it completely is viable. Next, we'll deal any wounds that happened. So his combat die actually had a wound symbol on it. So that will apply a wound to my little dude here. So he'll get to go ahead and smash it in, which will in turn one of his combat dice into a worse combat dice later on when he attacks. After dealing that wound, the last step would be collecting gems and healing. Now, had you rolled any heart symbols on wound dice, you'll get to heal those wounds, but if you rolled any gem symbols on your dice, you will get gems as well. Now, the player that lost their model, that was smashed, or it could have been both players, they get gems equal to the number of combat dice that they used. So, in this case, he had 2 regular and 1 wound combat die, so he would get 3 gems for losing his monster. There is an optional rule where if you have any wound dice, they don't apply to this, but for the base game, it is just equal to the number of combat dice. Then that would conclude the melee combat. Ranged combat works a little bit differently, so let me go ahead and set up an example and we'll see how that works. Alright, say it's the other player's turn later down the line and we've moved around a little bit. And the orange player here is wishing to attack the blue player. But they're not going to be able to move to get within the ranged combat, so say they had just rolled a range symbol and it was applied to their ranged ability here, which is 2. So they go off, they trigger it, they check, it's a medium length. Technically, they are long enough to get to them. However, there is a piece of terrain in the way. When this is the case, you cannot shoot through terrain unless you can see over it. So currently, this big piece of terrain is blocking this little guy from being able to shoot at this other little guy, or even the champion, because the champion is actually smaller than the piece of terrain here. So they would have to move around before they could be able to shoot. And this applies to the blue player as well. He would not be able to shoot through the terrain. And you cannot move through terrain, you have to move around it. And any smashed models also become a form of terrain that you'll have to move around. You can, however, move through friendly models, but not enemy models. But for argument's sake, let's say this piece of terrain isn't here, and my champion wishes to make a ranged attack against the little guy right here. He is within range 2, and my Tomarak has a ranged value of 3, so he's more than easily able to shoot at him. You will look at your stats again, so like melee, you will have a little range stat, which is the lightning bolt, and it says that I have 2 dice to start with, plus my champion die, which you always roll in every combat. You will then look at your opponent's defenses, and since he is a multi-tiered monster, so there is a bigger version and there is a smaller version, and right now we're shooting at the smaller version, we're going to be using the symbol for the smaller version. So he has 1 defense die. So 1 regular die and 1 champion die. And just like in melee, you get to do your applying wounds, it'll swap out dice, you get to modify your dice pools by spending gems, and modifying before rolls and after rolls. So it works all exactly the same. The only difference is say we roll our dice here, we're just going to do base rolls here. Say I roll my dice, and I got 4 hits, and I got no defenses. Okay. It works just like in melee. I would win the combat, I'd get to smash you, and so on. However, if say we were tied, normally in melee when you're tied in combat, you both get smashed. But in a ranged, the ranged guy can't, the guy that's getting shot at isn't attacking back, he's just getting shot at. So if it's a tie, he just survives and you also survive. And then if the defender wins against the number of attacks against the attacker, so say they had more hits than the attacker, in a normal melee combat, they would win and smash you, but in this case, they would simply just defend against the attack. They don't have to worry about getting smashed or anything like that. However, if the attacker had any wound symbols on their champion die, they would still apply wounds whether they defended it or tied. The defender, though, will not apply any wound symbols on their champion die as they are not in melee, so they aren't technically able to hit them. But that is how ranged combat works in relation to melee combat. The rest of the steps still work the same way, whether you killed a champion, triggering a last stand, dealing wounds, collecting gems, healing, and so on. At the end of a round, had your champion been smashed or a monster holding an artifact, you will now get to relocate your champion banner and your artifact, if you have any models left. Otherwise, if this was the second time your champion's been smashed, or if you have no models left, the opponent would win the game. So to select a new monster, you just pick any monster left available, so this would be my single guy here, and he gets to become my champion going forward until he gets smashed again, and that would be the second time, and then the blue player would win. And there you have it, what you need to know to get into Necromolds along with the Call to Arms expansion set. This wasn't every single rule in the game. There are some more advanced plays that you can use as well as basic, and you can also create your own rules with objective tokens and such. But I will leave that for you to explore later down the line if you pick up the game. This, I just hope, got you a good understanding of how the game works, what it looks like, how fun it could be, and if it was something you'd be interested in too. There's tons of monster packs you can get, accessories and such, but if you like this video and you want to see more like it, go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. Every little bit helps. We really appreciate it. And if you're looking to pick up Necromolds from us, we do have it on our online store or in-store. I will have links below in the description, as well as chapter times for any specific rules that you might need to be looking for. So thank you again for watching this how to play video of Necromolds and Call to Arms expansion set. I'm Patrick at Battlegrounds Game Center. Until next time, see you later.